So I was first made aware of this issue approximately 9 months ago when a user by the name of Hadcock Locust posted this graph to the Final Fantasy XIV subreddit with the caption, "This is how I feel leveling alt jobs, the range 60 to 70 is the worst." And if you take one small look at this graph, it is already apparent what he's trying to say. There is a very sharp decline at 60 that only starts to go back up at 70, and then it declines again when his EXP buff wears off. And that, of course, would make sense, but you would expect that the decline in the 60 range wouldn't be nearly that drastic, and this intrigued me, so I decided to go down in the comments and do some digging. And what do you know? To my surprise, for the first time ever in documented internet history, it seems as though the vast majority of people actually agree with this sentiment. So I decided to do some more digging, and I found another post from approximately 3 years ago of a user saying, "Hey guys, what do you think is the worst level range in Final Fantasy XIV?" And among the answers in that post, the common consensus was between 40 and then up to 70. Now, what's worth mentioning about this post is that it was 3 years ago, and a vast majority of the things that get highlighted are no longer problems. Somebody says the level 40 to 50 range is the worst, which I kind of agree with, because the Stone Virgil enemies hit like a freight train. The 44 dungeon just goes on too damn long, and I'm not even gonna entertain the idea of Aurum Vale. Not to mention that before you can even access Heavensward content, you're gonna have to make a 4-level jump, which to my knowledge is the biggest in the game, and it's not particularly pleasant. However, I wouldn't call it particularly hard because the jump of Aurum Vale takes about the same amount of time as it does to go from 59 to 61 inside of Heavensward. And that level range is particularly interesting because it's very easy up until you reach the Great Vault, but for that dungeon and then the 59 level dungeon after, for some reason EXP seems to drop off a fucking cliff. And it does this to such a point that even with a 360% EXP bonus, you have to run the Great Vault like 5 times just to reach the next dungeon. However, then you get to the 60 to 70 range, and when you're inside of this range, there is no immediately obvious problem. The EXP curve inside of the post-60 range is relatively consistent all the way through. I mean, yeah, sure, you get a little bit more from each dungeon, but that is to be expected. You need more EXP. There really is no dungeon in here that you will have to run noticeably more than the other. I know it may feel like it when you get the level 65 dungeon, but generally speaking, that's not how it works. So when I saw that and I took note of it, it just got me wondering why. Why is this the progression that nobody likes? And immediately my brain jumped to secondary content you can use to level. For those who don't know, the squadron stopped being supported inside of Stormblood, which means by the time you reach the level 60 range, you are no longer able to use their instant queues in order to access the dungeons. Not that you would want to though, because even with maximum offense, the squadrons have not had their moves replaced since the moment of their inception, and they never get a job stone. This means they would effectively be using sub-level 30 attacks inside of a 60 plus area, using the exact same moves that have been in the game since 1.0. And on top of all of that, they're stuck on legacy classes, which means if you bring them into Siren Song, they're going to get their asses beat. However, while they're out the door and not usable anymore, you do not get access to all of the quality of life leveling shit that came with Shadowbringers. This means no trust, no level synced beast tribes, no level synced quest, no level synced hunting log. You are going to have to raw dog your way through it with the A Realm Reborn progression. And naturally, this doesn't make for a very good experience. In fact, it is pretty much the only level range where the hunting board is a viable way of getting experience purely because there is nothing else to do. So naturally, when I'm taking in all of this information and taking a step back just so I can fully admire the sheer scale of this problem, I look at it and I say to myself, this is not the reason why Stormblood ruined level progression. As easy as it would be to point fingers at the features we don't have access to and the ones that we lost, the universal constant still remains the same. Your beast tribes are only going to be daily bursts of EXP. They're not really going to contribute all that much in the grand scheme of things if you're only trying to power level one class. And furthermore, trust in squadrons are just going to let you run the dungeons without queues. They aren't going to alter the EXP rate for you to make it more favorable, and half the people who say that they don't like the 60 range don't even fucking use either of them. That is all to say, if this is really the problem, then it wouldn't be as universal, as difficulty of content would eventually come in, or not having skills would be a factor that other people find to be less enjoyable. In other words, this is just a a long and convoluted way of saying there is a deeper problem with Stormblood content that has not been addressed for years, and now I want to see what it is. And in order to do that, you need to first understand how level progression actually works in Final Fantasy XIV. For those who don't know, the EXP is actually scaled in such a way that has been consistent since the release of Heavensward. In order to determine what the next EXP cap is going to be, they take the previous grand total of experience, multiply it by 2, and then slap it on top, and that's how much it takes to get to 60. Now, the reason why this exists is it is because it is supposed to encourage players to go out and do the new content that is appropriate of their level, because if they don't, they are yielding substantially less awards. Speaking broadly, this means that you are getting twice as much EXP in the comparable level dungeon of a 10 level decimal. Or, to say it in a less verbose way, the level 61 dungeon should theoretically grant half as much EXP as the level 71 dungeon does. If we take a look at this handy EXP chart courtesy of this user on Reddit, we see that that is exactly what is happening in the Shadowbringers and Stormblood dungeons. However, if we then take this information and go back and look at the Heavensward dungeon, you would expect that the level 61 range is giving 100% more as every other expansion did, but it's not. The level 51 dungeon in Heavensward grants a grand total of 150,000 experience points per run. Meanwhile, the Stormblood dungeon only grants 250,000. This means that the Stormblood level progression is not slow because you don't have trust or your grand company or anything like that. It's slow because it is a mathematical fact that it is giving you less. And it has always been this way. It's just that no one has ever taken the time to try and figure out why. And I know a lot of you are probably going to say, well, doesn't that mean future expansions are now going to get fucked up because of Stormblood? And yeah, no, that's exactly what it means. In a pre-Stormblood world, or at least before level 57, you were able to bid adieu to dungeons with the right multipliers after only 2 runs, but that is no longer the case. Thanks to Stormblood all the way back in the day, we can now say with a fair amount of certainty that the level 71 Shadowbringers dungeon is granting 60 to 80,000 less experience than it otherwise would have. However, fortunately for us, Shadowbringers is slightly faster than Stormblood, with you usually having to do about 3 runs with the right multipliers, maybe 4 if you get screwed over. Anyway, now that I'm done having a tantrum, if I had been making this video in Shadowbringers, I would have ended it all here, because that is where the story would have concluded. However, in a unforeseen twist, it appears as though the developers of the game realized their mistake back in Endwalker and made a decision to course correct it. I know a lot of you, since the release of Dawn Trail, have likely taken the precautions to max out your Vipers and your Pictos, and in doing so, and in revisiting the Endwalker content, you likely realized just how much faster it was. And by the way, you're not crazy, because under the right multipliers, you can completely cleave the level 80 to 90 range in, I shit you not, 9 dungeon runs. That is less than 2 a dungeon. And what's more interesting is how dailies work in this range as well. For some reason, if you do dailies between the level ranges of 80 and 90, they grant double the experience from any other level range, granting you 4 levels a day instead of 2. When I did my level challenge earlier this year, the Endwalker EXP curve ended up being the only reason I was able to get as far as I did. And video on that in the future, by the way. Like and subscribe if you want to see that when it comes out. But the point is, it blew my mind. And as it turns out, the reason why the EXP is supercharged in Endwalker is because you are getting double the experience in the 81 dungeon that you were getting in the 79 dungeon. In other words, that means while previously the status quo was set up where you would get double of the same progression, that now exists in the earliest possible format. You are getting 3 times as much experience, 1.7 million in the 81 dungeon compared to the 71, which is only granting 500,000. And literally all of that is not even the best part, because as it turns out, if you were to take the 33% deficit and then take that away from the 50% gain inside of Endwalker, this means we have a 17% bonus of experience. So, seeing as we we have this 17% surplus, what would happen if we, I don't know, for the sake of the argument, just add it to the Shadowbringers dungeon, which previously got screwed over by Stormblood? Well, in the event that you do this, what ends up happening is you get a number equal to 9,200 experience points extra for the 71 dungeon, and then if you add that to the previous 5,400, oh wow, would you look at that? The number that you get is approximately 63,000. In other words, the exact amount of experience that we would have gotten if Stormblood never screwed up the level progression. This means that not only did Endwalker fix the level progression issue present inside of Stormblood, but it also means that from this point on in the future, we will be able to max out our classes in less dungeon runs on average. Stormblood fucked it all up, but Endwalker fixed it. And if you ask me, that is far more fascinating than just some redditor with a bar graph saying he doesn't like level 60.